Good morning, viewers. I am once again with you on a very relevant topic which is concerning us, that is, managing security of our borders and best practices in tough times. I would request you to please subscribe to this channel of mine so that my voice can reach far and wide. Today, the security environment in the entire world is in a state of flux. Every country has some problem related to its own security. We in India are one-sixth of the world's humanity. Every citizen of the country here today wants a safe and a secure environment, both internally and externally. And for that, we have a strong army, the fourth largest in the world, 1.1 million strength, and we have huge borders with us, which many of these areas are disputed. I am reminded of a very relevant saying: God made land and man made boundaries. If you look at the map of India, you will find that we are surrounded by six countries. A border, a land border of almost 15,000 kilometers, and a maritime boundary of 7,500 kilometers. This entire boundaries are guarded by a multifarious of our agencies. We have the Indian Army, of course, we have the Border Security Force, we have the ITPP, we have the Special Frontier Force, we have the SSB, Shastras, Sena Bal, and all of these agencies have different bosses. So, how difficult would be the coordination in terms of intelligence, in terms of interoperability with each other? So, that is a challenge for all of us today. The boundaries also are of different types. We have the international boundary, 3,300 kilometers, basically with Pakistan, Punjab, and Rajasthan borders. Then we have the line of control in Jammu and Kashmir, which is 740 kilometers. Then we have the actual ground position line, which is in Siachen with Pakistan, almost 110 kilometers. And we have the line of actual control in One part is towards Arunachal, and the other part is towards further west, Akshai Chin area, Tibet area. This entire line of actual control is approximately 3,400 kilometers. The IB and LC have always been active. They have been smuggling narcotics along the international boundary from Pakistan, and the line of actual control, infiltration, terrorism has been rampant. And now the LAC has got activated. At the same time, along the eastern boundaries, Myanmar and Bangladesh, there is a problem of the influx of refugees. So you can see the overall security situation, how dynamic and difficult for the security forces. If you come to the coastline, we have to guard the coastline itself 15 agencies. There was a proposal in the parliament to have a national maritime authority, and it is time now to get into the mechanics of this national maritime authority. According to international convention, the coastal waters where you can exercise your authority is up to 12 nautical miles, and your exclusive economic zone, EEZ as it is called, is extending up to 200 nautical miles or 370 kilometers. So that is the area which is the jurisdiction of any country. So we have Maldives and Sri Lanka coming into play as far as our maritime, and of course Bangladesh also, as far as our maritime boundaries are concerned. Now, if you have a look at China's designs, China has already established a base in Djibouti, which is the Horn of Africa, Chabahar, which is in Iran, and all these are ports. Gwadar in Pakistan, Habbantota in Sri Lanka, and the Chittagong Post. So this is in their concept known as a string of pearls. This is the oil route. So in times to come, the security environment of our country will get further challenged by the expansionist designs of China in dominating the entire sea, right from the Pacific Indian Ocean and on to the South China Sea. Now, where are we today in terms of capability? Do we have that sea power, blue water navy, to dominate the seas? Do we have the Indian Army to dominate two fronts or two and a half fronts as they call it? There is a lot to do. So capability building has to be our first priority, any nation, if it wants to be strong, has to have two strong pillars. One is the defense, and the other is the economy. If you do not have these two pillars of yours strong, you will never be able to exert your influence in the world affairs. So it is very important that we develop our capabilities to the maximum. The Indian Army has been the support of the nation. It has been a forefront in nation building, and wherever it has been called for the internal security duties, or it could be for anything, it has been at the call of the nation. A recent survey carried out by Premji University, Aziz Premji University, regarding to the trust of the nation, who the people of the nation trust, and 77% of the respondents voted for the armed forces. Next was the Supreme Court with 55%, a High Court with 48%, a Parliament with 40%, and at the bottom was the political parties with minus 1.7%. So you can imagine the nation has the greatest trust in its armed forces. And armed forces are operating in a VUCA environment today. You are all management graduates, so you know what VUCA is. A volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Whenever we are called, the situation is volatile. It is uncertain, it is complex, and it is ambiguous. So we have to deal with it. Now to bring out the best practices in the Indian Army, it would be prudent for me to bring it out with certain examples so that your understanding of these best practices is better. So I will take out one example from the Kargil War, one example from the insurgency or the terrorism in the valley, and one example from the Balakot strikes. First example, Captain Vikram Batra, point 5140 Tololing. So he, from a very middle class family, from a village in Himachal, has a yearning to join the army. He is a good sportsman, joined the DAV college in Chandigarh, and then appears for the entrance exam for the Indian Army and joins the Indian Army and commissioned into the 13 Jammu and Kashmir Rifles. He was there in the Kargil War, and his battalion was tasked to capture point 5140 which had an incline of almost 80 degrees, a rocky climb. How difficult it would be to go up at a height of more than 16,000 feet. We are talking about. So he achieves this and captures and hoists the Indian flag there. And when the army chief, General Vaidya, congratulated him in the evening or the next day, he just made one statement, "Ye dil mange more." Look at the spirit and the resolve of this man. Highly motivated, led from the front, gave a personal example, motivated his men, and when his JCO was injured, did not leave his JCO there at the risk of his life, risk taking ability. The next example I will give you is Major Walia. Joined the Jat regiment, took part in the IPKF, and then moved on to the Special Forces, the 9 Para, 9 Para SF. He was out on a patrol in Kupwara, and in August 99, same time Kargil happened, he was with 5 men, and they got intelligence that 20 terrorists were hiding in a hideout. He had no time to ask for reinforcements. So the decision making. He took a decision on the spot and informed his seniors that I am going in. Having known the higher commander's intent, he moved in, single-handedly killed the 4 terrorists. He got injured in the bargain, but from his radio set, kept on directing the operation. He was awarded the Ashok Chakra, the highest gallantry award in peacetime. Captain Batra was awarded the Paramveer Chakra, which was the highest gallantry award in times of war. And now if I take you to the example of Squadron Leader Abhinandan, he took on the Pakistani Air Force when they violated airspace after Balakot. He was in a MiG-21 and he shot down an F-16. He was one step ahead of the UDA cycle. Organize, orient, decide, and act. So, the training he got from the armed forces was, you have to be one step ahead of the UDA cycle. So that is a best practice. You have to always be one step ahead of the UDA cycle. And that is why a first generation aircraft can take on a third generation aircraft. The UDA cycle was invented, or it came up from a pilot of the Royal Air Force in the World War II, Flying Lieutenant Boyd. The Uda cycle is in his name. So, these are the examples which I gave where the best practices which are taught to us, ingrained in us in the Indian Army, came out loud and clear. And if I may highlight these best practices to you, mental toughness was the first one. If you recollect the actions of Captain Batra, Major Walia, and Abhinandan, you will find this coming to the fore. Lead from the front, set a person example, and take risks. Because unless you take risks, you will not achieve the success. The next, have a self-belief and accept the challenge, which they did. Moral and physical courage is also another best practice which emerges out. Know the higher commander's intent came out loud and clear. You could take a decision, you could not look back to the higher commander and ask him what I should do, because you already know his intent. A directive style of command came up, and a team work one step ahead of the Uda cycle. And to all these things, the key is self-discipline. So these were the best practices which came up loud and clear. In the Indian Army, we always have a psychological edge. Our training is like that. Camaraderie is there. Physical and mental conditioning is there. War gaming and situational exercises are ingrained into us because that is how we train. Core drills are repeated. Standard operating procedures are repeated so that they become muscle memory, second nature to you. And we always look for opportunities whenever there is a chaos. So these are the important aspects which actually come to mind. And I am reminded of what Lord Krishna said in Mahabharata. You have two choices in life. Accept conditions as they exist, or accept responsibility for changing them. That is the mantra to all of you. Happy Independence Day. God bless. Jai Hind.